In the area of what is now part of the athletic complex and Lot 28, a crowd of hundreds of students gathered, launching firebombs at a building. Flames fill the air for the second time this year. Sirens blare, and as the police arrive, the students stand their ground. How did we get to this point? This is the story of the Vietnam War protests and the ROTC fires of 1970. The ROTC program has had a role in the university since September 1891, fulfilling one of the university's commitments to provide the U.S. military with top-trained candidates. The program had a major impact on the university, leading to a plaque erected in Brookings Quad commemorating students who died during their service in World War I. In the 1940s, they established a more permanent presence on campus when Quonset hut buildings were built to house the program. One would be for the Army, and to its left was one for the Air Force. From the start of the Vietnam War, a large number of students began to protest the U.S. involvement in it.
We identified ROTC as being the way that the university supported the war, directly. Without those second lieutenants, the war couldn't happen. It wouldn't have happened.
Though many students were actively engaged in peaceful protests, trouble started to brew in May 1968. On May 10th, arsonists set fire to debris in front of the Army's Quonset huts, marking one of the first instances of violence against ROTC at WashU.
When there were ROTC classes, we went over there and sort of disrupted the ROTC classes. It wasn't anything violent. We'd go out when they were out in the field marching around, we'd disrupt that.
Students would also commonly mock ROTC cadets as they were training, which was highly controversial.
There was one demonstration where the ROTC people were marching and people were putting flowers in their rifles.
Organizing these protests was the WashU chapter of Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, co-founded by Terry Koch. The Washington University Liberation Front, or WOLF, also had heavy involvement in many protests, with student leaders Ben Zaracore and others.
There were 5 organizations that became the Washington University Liberation Front, and that was pretty much SDS. There was surprisingly little dissension.
The WashU Liberation Front, WOLF, was sort of an ad hoc thing that formed, but you didn't join. Nobody joined these things.
I spoke at meetings and some people commented that I had good reasoning on certain things, and I made some statements that helped develop our programs.
The percentage of the student population that was actually involved in the anti-war movement at Washington University was the largest of any of the universities in the country.
It really felt like the campus was united, even though there were certain groups, of course, that weren't involved.
Protest activities became even more violent in late November 1968 with the first bombing attempt of an ROTC building. This was shortly followed by a second bombing attempt on December 3rd. At this time, the chancellor of the university was Thomas Elliott. Elliott had to find a delicate balance of appearing to listen to student concerns while protecting the ROTC program, as ultimately it was WashU's duty to run the program, especially during the war. However, he did not handle this balance well and ultimately upset many students with his reactions to the occurrences on campus, particularly with his steadfast condition to not shut down the ROTC program.
It was a faculty community council. This body voted to get rid of ROTC. Then the university said, well, no, we're not going to abide by this. We'll have to do something to try to make you take us seriously.
On December 7th, the Arts Sci faculty ruled that ROTC classes should not be for credit, which did go into effect, showing some level of compromise that Elliott was capable of. Behind the scenes, SDS, Wolf, and other organizations looked for ways they could influence the school in a more impactful way. As reported in Student Life on March 18, 1969, Ben Zarecor became Student Union president, thus paving the way for activists to influence WashU policy in the upcoming school year. To start his time as president, Zarecor led a Vietnam War moratorium on October 15, 1969. Zarecor also proposed a resolution to abolish ROTC in January 1970. However, his action fell on deaf ears. With all of this frustration surrounding the ROTC program up to February 1970, an event was about to occur that would become the catalyst for everything to follow in the rest of the school year. On February 23, 1970, the Army ROTC building was set ablaze. 200 to 300 students watched and cheered, but the specific people who did the act left out of fear. The authorities were never able to definitively figure out who started this fire, and no one has ever publicly admitted to it, except for one person who anonymously claimed responsibility on the My Fugitive podcast.
Most of my friends were pissed that somebody set the building on fire. Because that undercut our position. I mean, our position was we were peaceful demonstrators.
It wasn't well planned. It was a kind of spur of the moment. Let's just do something. Let's make a statement.
You would have thought that if someone wanted acknowledgement, they would have had some way of saying, well, we take credit for it, but nobody did.
I was driving and I heard something on the radio about it. I didn't go to the building that night in February.
Stay tuned for the next part of the ROTC Fires episode of the Secret History of WashU.